She was the most beloved woman in Britain. That wasn't an opinion. That was the polling data. Consistently, for decades. More popular than the Queen. More popular than anyone in the family. The pink hats. The wave from the balcony. The woman who stayed in London during the Blitz and walked through the rubble in her good coat. She was 97 years old on the morning of August 31st, 1997. She lived for 5 more years after that morning. 5 more years of public appearances, of Clarence House garden parties and royal engagements and Christmas broadcasts and the kind of royal life she had been performing since 1923. In all that time, in 5 years, in hundreds of public appearances, according to every biographer who has studied the record, she never once mentioned Diana by name. Not once. This is the story of what Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, actually did and said and felt in the week Diana died, and in the 5 years of silence that followed. It is a story built from named sources, documented accounts, and the specific kind of royal silence that says more than any speech ever could. And by the end of it, you will see the most beloved woman in Britain completely differently. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, born 1900, died 2002, 101 years old. The pink hats. The wave from the balcony. The woman who stayed in London during the Blitz when she could have left. When Buckingham Palace itself was hit by German bombs, she reportedly said she was glad. Now she could look the East End in the face. That line, that single line, tells you exactly how good she was at this. The Society photographer Cecil Beaton, who knew her for decades, described her as a marshmallow made on a welding machine. Soft on the outside, industrial strength underneath. A woman who looked like she could be moved by anything, and couldn't be moved by anything, including Diana's death. When the phone rang at Balmoral in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, this woman was asleep a short distance away. And when she found out what had happened, the first thing she said wasn't what you'd expect from a great-grandmother. It wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was 3 words that a courtier who was in that room never forgot. We'll get to exactly what those words were, and why they matter. But first, you need to understand what she actually thought of Diana, because the record is more brutal than anything you've read before. By every available poll in the 1990s, she was the most beloved member of the royal family by a considerable margin. That popularity was not an accident. It was the product of a specific, deliberate, lifelong performance of a particular kind of royalty. One that never explained itself, never complained, never under any circumstances let the face slip. She had a personal philosophy documented in academic literature on the monarchy that reduced to one instruction: be a royal. Whatever happens, whatever you feel, perform the role and let the role contain it. That is the woman who went to bed on the night of August 30th, 1997 at Birkhall, her private residence on the Balmoral estate. She did not know it was the last ordinary night for a very long time. But what she said when she woke up, and what she did in the 5 years that followed, is the part of this story that has never been told completely. The phone rang at the main castle shortly after 1 in the morning. A car crash in Paris. A tunnel under the Pont de l'Alma. Diana injured. The nature of the injury not yet clear. Early reports said she had suffered a broken arm and walked away. Over the next 2 hours, the mood inside Balmoral shifted from confusion to something harder to name. Charles wept. He asked over and over what they had done to deserve this. He told his private secretary Stephen Lamport they would all be blamed. Lamport didn't soften the answer. Yes, sir. He thought it likely. By 3:20 in the morning, Diana was confirmed dead. The Queen did not call Birkhall. That detail, documented by Jonathan Mayo in his minute-by-minute reconstruction of the night, sits quietly in the record, but carries real weight. The Queen's mother was 97 years old and asleep a short distance down the road. At 3:20 in the morning, with Diana dead, the decision was made to write a note. To let her sleep. To give her one final ordinary hour before the world changed. That is how Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon found out. She opened her eyes at Birkhall on the morning of August 31st. and someone brought her a letter from her daughter. What she said when she read it. What her face did. What the room felt like in that moment. The record does not say. But here's what the record does show. The historian Gareth Russell, whose 2022 biography of the Queen Mother drew on years of primary research, writes that when Diana died, the Queen Mother was not devastated. She was not grief-stricken. The word Russell chose, after years with the primary sources, was baffled. She was baffled by what had happened. Baffled by what the country was feeling. Baffled by why any of it was happening at all. That tells you everything about the three words that came next, and those words, spoken in front of a courtier who never forgot them, are coming in just a moment. But first you need to see the morning they were spoken. By 7:15 that morning, Prince Charles was standing in William's bedroom, 15 years old, woken before dawn by his father, told his mother was dead. Together, father and son went to Harry's room. Harry was 12. Charles told the boys, and then he told them he had to leave for Paris to bring Diana's body home. The boys would stay at Balmoral with their grandparents, and then came the Queen Mother's documented response, recorded by Andrew Morton from accounts of those present. When Charles left and the question of who would look after the boys arose, the Queen Mother said, "We are all together. We can look after them." A courtier present described her mood as steely. That word is worth sitting with for a moment. Steely. Not stricken. Not searching. Not the language of a woman processing something unthinkable. Steely. An organisational response to an organisational problem. A role to step into. A function to perform. Some counter-argument is necessary here. She was 97 years old. A woman born in 1900. Adult through 2 world wars. Shaped by loss on a scale most people never encounter. She had buried a husband at 51. She had watched her brother-in-law destroy the monarchy and her husband rebuild it and her daughter inherit it. She had cultivated composure not as a mask but as a moral virtue. As the historian Gareth Russell, whose 2022 biography of the Queen Mother is among the most carefully researched accounts of her life, documents, she genuinely believed that steadiness in the face of catastrophe was both a moral and a practical good. So steely does not necessarily mean cold, it may mean something more complicated than that. A woman so thoroughly formed by a particular idea of how to behave that no other register was available to her. Even here, even on this morning, even with her great-grandsons in the next room. But we can look after them is not the language of grief, it is the language of management. And that distinction matters. At 11:25 that morning, the royal family arrived at Crathie Kirk. Crathie is a small granite parish church near the gates of the Balmoral estate. The royal family had attended services there every summer Sunday for decades. The drive from the estate takes minutes. On a normal August Sunday, it was unremarkable. An obligation fulfilled quietly. On August 31st, 1997, the whole world was watching. William and Harry were in black ties, their faces visible to anyone at the roadside as the cars pulled through. Harry later wrote in his memoir Spare that as the family passed, the sound of photographers' cameras was like an explosion, and he cursed himself for reaching for his father's hand, hating that the gesture had been recorded. The visiting preacher that morning stuck to his prepared sermon, the sermon he had written before Diana died. It contained no mention of her death, nothing in the liturgy, nothing in the prayers. Nothing from the pulpit acknowledged that the 2 boys in the pews had been told that morning their mother was gone. The family drove back to the estate afterward. The cameras were there. Britain was there. The world was there. Relations between the Queen Mother and Diana had not improved when Diana was tragically killed. She died just a few weeks after the Queen Mother's 97th birthday. The Queen Mother was in that pew. She had made the decision to be there with everyone else as the institution chose its frame. Multiple academic papers on the public reaction to Diana's death identify the Crathie Kirk service as the precise moment public fury at the monarchy crystallised into something organised and sustained. The family at church as normal. No acknowledgement, as if nothing had happened. The palace later framed it as protection for the princes. William himself said later he was grateful for the privacy at Balmoral. But the institution's justification and the public's perception occupied completely different worlds that morning. And the distance between them was the week's defining crisis. Before going further, something needs to be said plainly about who is telling this story and what they had access to. 4 writers produced the most detailed accounts of the Queen Mother's private behaviour during September 1997. William Shawcross, Gareth Russell, Andrew Morton, and Tina Brown. Their access was radically different. Their sympathies were radically different. Where they converge from different directions, the picture becomes most reliable. Where only one of them says something, that needs to be noted. William Shawcross wrote the authorised biography of the Queen Mother, published in 2009, commissioned by the royal family with access to the royal archives. His named sources include Sir Michael Oswald, the Queen Mother's racing manager, and Lady Angela Oswald. Real people, named, with documented proximity to Elizabeth Bowes Lyon for decades. His work is the most factually grounded of the 4. It is also structurally inclined toward a favourable portrait of its subject. Authorised biographies work within the boundaries of the archive they are given. What Shawcross documented through those named sources is this. The Queen Mother was hugely upset and felt angry and defensive about the criticism directed at Queen Elizabeth II in the days following Diana's death. She was furious. The Shawcross account makes this clear. That her daughter was being attacked by press and public for insufficient mourning. That emotion was real. The source is named. The attribution is clear. Notice what the emotion is directed at. Not at Diana's death, not toward Diana at all. Toward the people attacking the crown. The highest confidence, best sourced, most credibly attributed account of the Queen Mother's feelings in September 1997 is this. Institutional protectiveness. Fury at siege. Her documented attention was on the critics, not the loss. Gareth Russell's 2022 biography, the most recent, and in some ways the most revealing account, adds another dimension. When Diana died, the Queen Mother was baffled by the outpouring of grief. Not moved by it, not humbled by it, baffled. The word chosen by a historian who spent years with the primary sources. Both the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret later agreed there was no need for a permanent memorial to Diana inside the grounds of Kensington Palace. Margaret acidly suggested that it would be quite enough of a memorial to restore the grass in front, which all those people had trampled the week she died. The Queen Mother agreed with that position. It is documented, it is named, it is sourced. To understand the silence that followed, you need to understand the relationship that preceded it. Diana's grandmother, Lady Fermoy, was the Queen Mother's closest confidant and one of her ladies-in-waiting. The 2 women had known each other for decades. When the question of a match between Diana and Charles arose, Lady Fermoy warned Diana directly, "I don't think their sense of humour or lifestyle is going to suit you." Lady Fermoy was right, and Lady Fermoy, Diana's own grandmother, eventually sided with the palace over her granddaughter. It was reported that Lady Fermoy was not on speaking terms with Diana when she died in 1993. The Queen Mother absorbed Charles's account of the marriage during its hardest years. Multiple biographical sources confirmed that during those years, it was to his grandmother that Charles confided. She was hearing his version, not Diana's. Tina Brown, whose 2007 book, The Diana Chronicles, drew on a former member of the Queen Mother's staff, unnamed, but with documented proximity, wrote that during the hardest years of the marriage, those inside the palace circle told each other Diana was paranoid, fanciful, obsessively jealous. The Queen Mother dismissed her concerns as the imaginings of a silly girl. That characterization derives from Diana's account, filtered through Morton, filtered through Brown. The route it travels to the page matters, but the phrase is specific, and it describes a documented private stance. By the time Diana died, Russell writes, Margaret referred to her as the girl who married my nephew. Not Diana, not the Princess of Wales, the girl who married my nephew. A woman stripped of name and title in private conversation, reduced to her relationship to the family she had left. The Queen Mother shared a world with that assessment. She lived inside it. She never publicly contradicted it. Outside the estate walls, a different week was happening. By September 2nd, The queue to sign the condolence book at St James's Palace was 7 hours long. The flowers outside Kensington Palace extended 30 feet from the gates. Teddy bears, photographs, handwritten notes on hotel stationery, and the backs of receipts. Someone left a bottle of 1995 Burgundy. By September 10th, the pile near the gates measured 5 feet deep in places, and the bottom layer had already begun to compost. Total strangers stood in the queue and wept. A woman outside Buckingham Palace jabbed a photographer in the ribs. "You killed her." Inside Balmoral, a senior aide's description of the royal family's experience that week, recorded in Morton's account, captures the gap between castle and country with unintended precision. At Balmoral, they hadn't taken it in. The whole nation seemed to have gone bananas. The Queen and Prince Philip felt utterly bewildered. The Queen Mother was in the castle too, watching the same incomprehension, sharing the same institutional frame, bewildered by what she described, through her agreement with Russell's documented account, as grief that made no sense to her. Eventually, under sustained pressure from the Blair government, the Queen returned to London. She gave her televised address. She walked outside and looked at the flowers. She bowed slightly toward the crowds who recognised her. The Queen Mother came with her. She was in that group. She returned to London because the institution needed to be seen returning to London. She performed the role. That is what she did. The funeral on September 6th was built on a plan called Operation Tay Bridge. That plan had been designed and rehearsed for 22 years in anticipation of one specific death, the Queen Mother's. When planners needed a framework for Diana in September 1997, they reached for the nearest available template. It was in a drawer with the Queen Mother's name on it. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon's funeral plan was borrowed for the woman she called a silly girl, and the Queen Mother had to watch it happen. Whatever she felt about that, the record does not say. The record only shows she was there, and she kept going. The Queen Mother lived until March 30th, 2002. She was 101 years old. In the 5 years between Diana's funeral and her own death, the record shows a consistent and complete absence of any public reference to Diana. No interview, no speech, no walkabout, no formal occasion in any account preserves a recorded mention of Diana's name. This requires honest interpretation. She was 97 when Diana died, and her health declined significantly through 2001 and 2002. Her last major public engagement was the recommissioning of HMS Ark Royal on November 22, 2001. She was bedridden through long stretches of those final years. The shrinking platform means fewer opportunities to mention anyone, but the silence is also documented as something active rather than merely incidental. A Grazia Daily account citing an unnamed equerry described the Queen Mother as having refused to let Diana's name be mentioned in her presence after the separation. The source is unnamed and therefore lower confidence, but the word used is refused, a directive, an active posture, not mere absence. When asked at an intimate gathering at Clarence House in the 1990s what advice she would give to her great-grandchildren William and Harry, the Queen Mother replied with a frozen smile, "Oh, I never give advice." The journalist pressed. She did not yield. Before we get to the funeral, and to the moment that reframes everything about the week Diana died, if you're finding this story as extraordinary as I do, make sure you're subscribed. Because what we uncovered about Prince Philip and Diana, the private letters, what he actually wrote about Camilla, and what he did at the funeral that nobody reported properly, that story is already on the channel. And it connects directly to what you're about to hear. Don't go anywhere. The woman who could not be moved. The marshmallow maid on a welding machine. Sitting in a room with two boys whose mother she would never name in public, offering them nothing on record except her presence and her composure. Whether that composure concealed grief for Diana specifically, the record cannot answer. What the record shows is where her documented attention was directed. Not toward the loss, toward the institution, toward the boys as future royals, toward the crown that had to continue. On March 30th of 2002, the Queen Mother died at Royal Lodge, Windsor. The tenor bell of Westminster Abbey sounded 101 times, one for each year. Operation Tay Bridge ran. The plan built around her for 22 years. Borrowed for Diana in 1997, now finally deployed for the woman it had always been intended for. 200,000 people file past her lying in state over 3 days. The queue stretched more than a mile along the Thames. The ceremonial architecture, the gun carriage, the Westminster framework, the specific formal structure Diana had received first. All of it now ran for the woman who had been baffled by the grief that followed Diana's death. No tribute delivered at her funeral. No major obituary published in the days after. No statement from family, friends, or colleagues recorded any words she had spoken about Diana in the 5 years since the funeral. Both the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret had agreed there was no need for a permanent Diana memorial inside the grounds of Kensington Palace. That position stood. It was never publicly revised. It was never publicly explained. The Queen Mother died with whatever she had thought about Diana still sealed inside the same composure that had sealed everything else for a century. Here is what is honest to say. The Queen Mother was baffled by the grief. That is documented. She was furious at the critics of the Crown. That is documented through named sources with clear access. She agreed there was no need for a permanent Diana memorial. That is documented. She called Diana a silly girl during the marriage years, filtered through multiple sourced accounts. She shared a world with a sister-in-law who called the outpouring of grief hysterical, just like Diana herself. Whether she felt private grief for the woman in rooms where no biographer had access, the record cannot answer, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. What the record shows with the most confidence is this. The Queen Mother's documented emotional register during the week Diana died was institutional protectiveness. The highest sourced, most credibly attributed, most clearly documented reaction was fury that her daughter was being attacked. Not sorrow for Diana. Not acknowledgement of what had happened to 2 boys she loved. Fury at the critics. And then 5 years of silence. Complete. Documented. Unbroken. Some silences are the record. They are not gaps in the record. They are the record itself. The woman who lived through 2 world wars and the abdication and her husband's death and 50 years of widowhood and the slow dismantling of the monarchy she had helped build. That woman had decided, in whatever private calculations she made, that Diana's name would not be spoken. She took that decision to Royal Lodge. She took it to the lying in state. She took it into the ground at St George's Chapel, Windsor, where she was buried on April 9th, 2002. The funeral plan came home. The borrowed ceremony was returned to its original owner. And the name that was never spoken is still the loudest thing in the room.